All right, if everybody wants to go ahead and just introduce themselves, we'll go around this way. I think that would be best, and then we can go ahead and start. Yep.
I'm Justin Smith. I am the Director of Choral Activities here at Queen's. Gosh, in terms of affiliation, my grandfather was a Presbyterian minister. I was raised Unitarian, and I'm pretty solidly atheist, but maybe a little bit of agnostic mixed in there.
I'm Hadia Mubarak. I'm Assistant Professor of Religion at Queen's University, a mother of two, one of my primary identities at this point. And I'm Muslim. My family is originally from the Middle East. My father is from Syria, and my mother's from Jordan. And they immigrated to the United States in 1979. And so I occupy this interesting space of being a hyphenated Muslim Arab American.
I'm Scott Jarrett. I'm the Artistic Director of the Bach Academy of Charlotte and guest conductor for this upcoming concert that kicks off this Presbyterian Pluralism Conference and associated programming. I grew up in Virginia, Southern Baptist, and like many of us in college, we sort of began to recover from that experience, and but it comes full circle. And I have worked for about 25 years at Boston University's Marsh Chapel as the director of music. BU is a Methodist school, strongly in the Wesleyan tradition, and that's where I've been for a long time. My life also included 11 years with the Charlotte Symphony, in which I came to Charlotte each Tuesday. And I'm also an alum of Furman University, which is a Baptist school over the border in South Carolina. So my connections with this place and also religious connections are strong. And it was about 10 years ago. I've always loved the music of Bach. And Bach's music is very much in the spirit of everything current for Lutheranism in the 18th century, early 18th century. And about 10 years ago, I discovered that just as Bach's Lutheran theology was a pre-Enlightenment theology, so is the Southern Baptist theology. So they work really well together. And so I sort of understand it. And it's been really wonderful to look at this music and to see what it might have meant for the listener and for the congregant at that time, and to see its extraordinary relevance for everyone today.
Hi, I'm Yuling Chen, and I'm an assistant professor in music therapy at Queen's. I identify myself as a Buddhist. I also have been going to church and sing at a choir. So in my own opinion, I think I am practicing pluralism, at least in my definition. And I think as I myself is from Taiwan, so I'm a Taiwan citizen, but I'm also a resident in America. So I embrace both cultural, and I feel like my religious practice is also embrace both parts.
Hi, I'm Alexa Royden. I am a professor in political science here at Queen's. I am also the faculty advisor for secular and humanist students on campus. I represent all theistic traditions here at Queen's, and as a relation to this, my first degree is actually in theater and performance. So so one of the things that really interests me is how the arts help create a more compassionate society. So I think that especially with this topic, with the Requiem, it has a strong appeal for really all faith traditions.
Well, welcome everyone. We're super excited to have you. My first question is towards Justin and Scott. Will you share a little bit about the Pandemic Requiem that we're holding and how it fits into Presbyterian and Pluralist Week, which is promoting religious and philosophical diversity?
I'll go first, then Scott can say it better. Gosh, it's hard. Time has no meaning anymore during the pandemic, especially for those of us in the performing arts, because for the last 2.5 years, we've just been planning things and canceling them and planning things and canceling them. But I think maybe 1.5 years or so ago, Scott gave me a ring and said, I see your new position here at Queen's. I have this great new gig as the artistic director of the Charlotte Bach Academy. Let's talk. And so we had coffee and talked and got along quite well. And we started thinking about how could we put our two organizations together for the mutual benefit of both our operations. And we came up with some pretty great collaborations, sort of uniting and playing off the strengths of our two organizations. So, long story short is that Scott suggested, what about if I did Bach 106 with your college students? It's a great piece for college voices. It's challenging but not too challenging. It's beautiful but not too long. It's great. And I said, oh, that's great. But I was planning this performance of the Lord St. Luke's Eterna, which we're going to take to New York this summer. Is there any overlap with that, like theologically or textually? And his eyes just like lit up, and he said, yeah, everything. And so we found this wonderful pairing between these two works, separated by, 270-ish years of history, and yet sharing an awful lot in common, despite being quite different on the surface, because the composers had different harmonic and musical vocabularies available to them. So we came up with this plan where we would bring his wonderful musicians on campus to accompany my students in the choir, and he's been gracious enough to conduct them and work with them and coach them. And then so we came up with the idea of, it's also 2 years since the pandemic hit this country, and should we do something that, since both these pieces are really about death, and more importantly, what comes after death, and that is a way of solace. We said, maybe let's make this some kind of memorial concert to the almost 1 million people who we have lost in this country from COVID. And so it all kind of is one of those wonderful things where everything seemed to kind of happen all together. And so my students are having this amazing experience of singing and singing with some of the finest early musicians in the country, and Scott is a nationally recognized Bach scholar. So it was one of those wonderful bits of coincidence that is really hopefully going to produce a great product that you will all see on February 24th.
Thanks, Justin. This is just, it really has been stars aligning for a collaboration to come together, and not to mention Justin's and my own coincidences about places that we've lived and studied. And
I think Scott lives about 5 minutes down the street from where I used to live in Boston.
About a half a mile.
Yeah.
And
which is the coolest part of town. So
went to
it's no
grad
surprise.
school where I was doing summer work in Oregon, and
that's right.
So lots of wonderful connections. But the pandemic has revealed how frayed our society is and how frayed we are at practicing society. And one of the things that has been revealed to me more intimately is, and actually in quite a very formal and structured way, the way in which music making, communal music making, singing in a choir, playing in an ensemble, reveals the mode in which we can be society, in which I'm a tenor or a baritone, and you're an alto, and you're a soprano, and whatever. And you have your own voice, but when we have them together, there's a pluralism or a harmony that's created. And if I can only sing in A flat, and you can only sing in E flat, but you can only sing A natural, that's great. That's a wonderful dissonance, but they mean something totally different when they're together. And so Western music, history of Western music and polyphony really its development mirrored societal discourse. I can go on about that for a while, but when my ensembles have come back together to sing, and I know Justin would say this too, it has been such a balm for the musicians to actually be able to come together and be with one another and make music with one another, because we can do something far greater as the aggregate than any of us could do alone. And the echo chamber, that the internet and social media have become takes a back seat to that enterprise. So the endeavor around it is really valuable, and our society needs its practice at it evermore. The topic, that we have come to with these works is mortality, and in large part, my understanding, theologies have generated over the generations to help us understand existential things. And my dean at university often says, death makes us mortal, but facing death makes us human. And I think that's a really powerful idea. And for most of us, we grow up in a tradition that has some sort of system to reconcile or accommodate or make sense of it all. It can become dogmatic. And one of the valuable things about this concert is that we're not singing in English. So I think Justin's piece, the Lux Aeterna, is Latin text. The Bach is a German text. So both of those, language adds a filter through which one can experience and remove oneself a little bit so that what is a difficult and personal topic maybe takes on a different access or allows a different access because language is so vibrant and allows a different lens through which to look. And then, of course, music. I mean, this has been attributed to Augustine, but who knows, really? He who sings praise twice. So when you add the musical element to the text, you find something, I think, that can be really deeply personally meaningful, but that can also help us individually, but corporately and as a society to lift one another up. And it's been a tough time for anybody who's a musician or a person who is emotionally connected. And as musicians, our talent and our success is based on our emotional availability in the moment. My mother is a banker, and her success is not based on her emotional availability in the moment. Quite the opposite. So I think it's been a difficult time for people, and music, whether or not they know it or can say it, everybody has a sense of music's power for healing and for creating a connective tissue that alleviates the bone on bone that has been the past 2 years.
And Scott, you totally stole my St. Augustine quote because I had that written down, and I was going to bring that up, and you snatched it right out from under me. But it's true. But it's really, and even if he who sings praise twice, or she who sings praise twice, I really believe in that. Even though I don't feel like I need to particularly pray to anything because I don't personally believe in anything really. But the idea is that when you sing these words, you bring so much more to them than if you were to only speak them. And that the addition of music and counterpoint and harmony and dissonance in these pieces you will hear on February 24th in the hands of a master composer takes on so much incredible meaning, whether it's for Bach, who was sort of actively trying to teach his congregation the gospel, or in the case of Lauritsen, which is a much more kind of ecumenical, almost non-denominational requiem. It doesn't really mention Jesus. It only mentions Jesus once, which is in the middle of the third movement, which in a 5-movement piece is the central movement, which is an idea that Lauritsen steals directly from J.S. Bach, the way that he structures his cantatas and the way that 106 is structured as well. So, yeah, I mean, even if you don't consider yourself a praying person, I think both of us believe that these words are only words and that they are amplified in meaning and beauty and significance when you sing them, and especially when they're being being performed. Yeah,
we don't know. Bach wrote this cantata for a funeral, but we don't know who it was that had died. And I think our Queen students should find it fascinating that Bach was 22 years old when he wrote this piece. And even if he had not written anything else after this piece, B minor Mass, any of the Passions, any of that, this piece is one of the great monuments of all music. I mean, it alone is such a masterpiece. But for a 22-year-old person to understand the theology that is in this piece, which we won't even touch on in this conversation, but the Lutheran idea of the Old Testament Hebrew scriptures representing the law. All man, like all flesh is as grass, must die. With the Christian scriptures, the New Testament, grace, law and grace, exists not in dichotomy, but rather in dialectic. And that's a heady Lutheran concept that I've scratched my head about a lot. But it's very much in the piece. And the collection of texts, which are almost entirely scriptural, and layered with chorale tunes, so the tune would invoke or evoke a certain idea in your as you hear something else. But he embraces the emotional frailty of the individual anxiety of facing loss, of the existential threat. And there is a stunning moment right in the middle of the piece where the chorus, a three-voice chorus, has been singing, "It is the old law that you must die." It's really kind of cheerful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really quite heavy. And then over top of that, the soprano solo sings, "Herr Jesu, komm," Lord Jesus, please come. And she sings an increasingly anxious line, and the piece sort of fritters out and it sort of loses its steam, and she sort of sings
Weird moment.
very
Strange moment.
very lonely, desolate, descending scale, and it is the moment at which her faith is most tested. And that's the moment each of us feels in a life and a journey about faith, that solitude. And what happens right after it are the words of committal. "Into your hands I commit my spirit," in Deine Hände. And it's from that moment that a glimmer of hope begins to emerge, and that's followed by the baritone singing, "Heute wirst du mit mir," "Today you will be with me in paradise," with the words of Christ on the cross to the fellows on the left and the right. And so at once you have this bereft, utterly, just completely desolate moment at the height of one's grief and anxiety, where you need a faith to kick in. And that's indeed what happens, and it's revealed. And he at once calms the individual soul, regardless of theology. Who cares? But he is able to harness what those feelings really are. But intellectually, when you look at it too, he truly achieves that amazing dialectic of law and grace in a way far more, in a sense, far more successfully than Schleiermacher a century later, or Hegel or somebody like that, theologically. So it is a stunning piece. As somebody who is devoted to this music and who's found great meaning in it for me personally, it's great to see musicians who are usually really kind of crabby, kind of a crusty, crabby bunch, musicians, to come together.
I don't know what he's talking about.
And find a really stunning joy and meaning with one another around it.
I was just thinking about this piece because here's this 22-year-old kid just starting his career out, no experience, and he's in backwater in middle of nowhere Germany. He hasn't gotten to Leipzig yet, where he reaches the top of his profession, and he gets this commission for, we don't know who, but it was the fact that we don't know who it was for means it was probably no one of means or no one of status in 18th century society. The orchestration is really strange. It's only a couple string instruments, a couple Baroque cellos, and two recorders. So clearly they didn't have enough money to put a big band together for this, right? And Bach could have just said, "Oh, well, this is a meaningless commission. I'm just going to dash something off in 5 minutes." And instead, he delivers this unbelievably moving kind of mini 20-minute masterpiece. He didn't have to do that.
Garden variety music from this composer ever. And
that's true.
And this is one of the reasons I wanted to choose this piece. There is an economy of scale around the number of instruments, of course, that has financial benefit for us all. But 2 recorders and 2 violas da gamba with continuo is a very delicate sound. and to introduce Queens to historical performance and early music practice. I thought this was nothing better than that because
Are there any other cantatas scored for that?
no,
No, it's really
it's
unusual.
unique
Yeah.
in the output.
Yeah. And you will hear it on the 24th. You will hear it on the not on original instruments, but on instruments that are made in the original style. So
I have this written down. It may be of interest, and we can edit it out if you don't want it, because it may not be germane to everything. But I have for Bach, loss of loved ones was a frequent occurrence. He lost both of his parents before the age of 10. His twins, born in 1713, died within a month. His wife in 1720. His brother in 1721. 8 of the children born of his second wife from 1723 to 1730.
8 between
8.
7 years.
He lost 8 children in that time. So,
Yep.
It was his job as a church musician to provide music for these occurrences, but it was also clearly something that he had to reconcile personally, and clearly Lutheranism provided a really robust theology for folks to make sense of it all.
So for the other three of you, you guys are coming from diverse backgrounds, diverse positions, and diverse educational fields. Learning a little bit more about the music and what we are really like trying to get to the heart of. Where are you coming from? Your thoughts, your perspectives, your ideas on everything that we've talked about.
I think what's particularly interesting and useful from it would be difficult to speak for all non-theists, right? So I'm glad we have a Buddhist because, we have some representation from that area. But it just struck me as I was listening to this that we recently lost Thich Nhat Hanh. And if you watch the memorial services, music was an incredibly important part of this. I think regardless of whether you are a Lutheran or a faithful member of, one of the major religious communities, or if you're a secular humanist or an atheist, as I am, music is a way in which we can really wrestle with our mortality. It is in many ways a communal experience. I mean, I thought it was very moving, Scott, as you were talking about, musicians coming back together. There was just this relief being together again. But I think there's also this just outstanding feeling of, what's next. And I'm looking forward to the Requiem because it's a way to share this experience that I'm not sure we can really effectively, describe yet, in a way that allows people of all traditions, when you are describing that period in the music where you have this despair, it doesn't matter what faith tradition you come from. I think all human beings, you listen to it and it's just, there's a universality to it, a commonality to it. That allows us to express grief. And grief for those of us who are contemplating our mortality and, grief for those of us who've lost in this last 2 years. And I don't know, I think that is something we all experience. So, I think when I contemplate the variety of traditions, both theist and non-theist, I think there's extraordinary potential for music to create connection. So that's what I would say.
Music speaks where words fail.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know anyone who can walk into, listen to an orchestra or whatever medium it is. It kind of circuits from the intellectual to the heart, and that's really.
I was thinking about that. There's a wonderful scene in Amadeus, the Mozart bio, where he's coming into the emperor's room and he's pitching one of his operas. It would eventually become the Abduction from the Seraglio, I think. And he's saying there's this great thing at the end of the first act where one character comes in and starts singing, and then another character comes in and they're singing together, and then a third and fourth and fifth and a sixth, and this is what Mozart is known for, right? Are these wonderful ensembles. And he said you couldn't do, if that was a play, you couldn't do it, right? It would just be gibberish. It wouldn't make any sense. But if you do it, if you sing it somehow, because of the power of music, it works. You can have all this Tower of Babel situation going on, and yet it works. And that I've always remembered that scene because I love that notion that music allows what would otherwise be chaos to be harmonious. I love that.
So I was listening to everybody talking, and I think it relate to me, and is that the relationship between words and music, and something that you cannot describe, you can feel in music. My another identity, which I'm a music therapist, I see this all the time. I see this every day, and music can kind of transcend words or the things you could not express. I will say it's nonverbal or beyond words. It's actually the power is beyond word. We work with patients, with hospice patients, or even like people have hard time expressing words, and music is really speak for them. So and also a Taiwanese, I don't really know the text, but I can appreciate the music. I actually have the privilege to rehearse with the choir, so I know those music, and I think just the beauty of it, even though you don't know the theory, you don't know that, but all the like the symbols, like the arch form, or when this text is doing this thing, and the music really reflect that. And I think it just, even though you don't know the text, you will understand that. But I do want to bring out a different perspective as a Buddhist. It's very interesting. Death is not something we talk about. It's a taboo. And yeah, if you talk about it, it's a bad luck. So that I actually is quite foreign to us that there is a music dedicated or talk about death. And also in funeral, we don't sing, because sing and music is something you do when you are happy. So there's no, yeah. So you chant scriptures from Buddha, and those chanting, well, depending on your definition, there's kind of like gurgle chant. It has melody too, but depending on if you call it music or not. But the purpose of chanting is to help your loved one to be able to be in a better place. And then by doing that, you believe that your loved one is going to a better place, comfort that person. So that's usually the what we do in a funeral. But I also want to say I embrace the Christianity. So I learned that people as a Christian, you can be baptized and you get married and you have your funeral in one church. That idea is really like, wow. So it's actually so beautiful for me, because for us, you don't do funeral and getting married at the same place. That's just two totally different things. You don't put in together.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but the idea like the same place is about birth and about death is so very holy for me, and that actually gave me some comfort, because I have to say our thinking about afterlife is different, because reincarnation, right? So you actually don't know where. Well, traditional thinking is you actually don't know where you will be. That's why you have to chant. Hopefully, that person will be to a better place. So because that unknown is actually quite scary. However, to think that it's actually not, you're come back to where you're from, is quite comforting.
So the music at a Buddhist funeral would not be sung; it would be chanted.
It will be chanted, yeah.
Because you only sing when you're happy.
Yes.
I like that.
Well, it's interesting, and a traditional Roman Catholic Requiem Mass is can be quite a maudlin, overwrought, sad, draped in black, mourning experience. But on the flip side of that, there are a lot of funerals and sort of more conservative or evangelical traditions that are joyful events where you would sing a hallelujah chorus or something like that the person has celebrating a life and that they have gone home to be with God. And African American spirituals use this imagery all the time. Deep River, I want to cross over into campground, or Beulah Land, or any of these. They're almost all I mean, they're coded. It's coded language, obviously, right? The crossing over might have to do with the Underground Railroad, but those traditions, it's shedding the mortal coil is a great thing. Life here on earth is but suffering. So the afterlife.
And I think that's one of the things that that unites all of the pieces. Actually, we're doing, because we're doing two small pieces in addition to the Lord's and the Bach, and they both end on major chords. They both end on very. The Lord's ends with this ecstatic, terrifically difficult hallelujah that goes on and on and on, and is quite difficult. We've been working on it for weeks now, and the Bach ends in a big E flat major, a celebration. And so that is one thing that draws these two. That it is not a terror filled attitude towards death.
It's like sometimes good television does this. Like in the 23 minutes of television, it can reveal how something happens.
Mm-hmm.
I always think there was a Will and Grace episode where Jack comes out to his mother. Well, okay, but it goes through all of the absurdities and the very real conversations that went on around that in 23 minutes of television, and it reveals, how everybody can feel. It acknowledges that, but then it reveals a path toward, how to get to the next step, gracefully and beautifully, and care and loving care for one another. And both of these pieces, I think, do that with their various topics in really, obviously, effective ways, because we still
do them.
I just, would echo that, of course, ideas that everyone has mentioned, this idea of death being sort of this universal experience like birth, and the fact that it's this ultimate equalizer, right? The ultimate human equalizer. We don't all experience war. We don't all experience immigration. We don't all experience exile or poverty, but we all experience death. And in many ways, like music, it's that transcendence. And I think in many ways there are interesting intersections between music and that experience of death, because you don't need words, right? And music has this ability to sort of, I think, elicit certain emotions or actually tap into existing emotions, right? I think that's the power of music, that it sort of maybe almost taps into something that's already there, and it just has this incredible ability. But one thing when I was listening to you, Ling, that I thought was really interesting was in Islam, it's quite the opposite, that death is very much supposed to be on the forefront of our consciousness, this idea of a meeting God in the afterlife, and that this is supposed to basically permeate our every choice. That we think of our lives, every human life, as a culmination of choices, and that moral agency of choosing at every moment what we will do is sort of what makes us, what makes us accountable, before God. But and also, I think the Muslim conception of death is quite interesting, because it's not the end. It's really just seen as a transition from one realm of existence to another realm of existence. And so we think of the human as a sort of going through these realms of existence from nothingness to something, and then from there to the grave, and then from the grave to the day of judgment, and from the day of judgment to the afterlife. But of course, there is a lot of unknown throughout these realms of existence. But so in many ways, it's not necessarily something to be feared. Although, of course, I think we all have fear surrounding, like Alexa said, just contemplating our mortality. However, I want to mention a quote by one of the companions of the Prophet, who had said, work for your dunya, the dunya meaning it's this the worldly life. He said, work for the dunya as if you will live forever, and then work for your afterlife as if you will die tomorrow. And I think that saying, and it rhymes, there's a rhythm to it in Arabic. I think it kind of really encapsulates this really delicate balance, of, if you're so obsessed with the idea of dying, because like I mentioned in this, it is supposed to be at the forefront of your consciousness, then you can really stunt you and you're, incapable of functioning. But at the same time, there's this really fine balance of, no, like you need to fully be present in this world. And, and one thing I will add also is a tradition from Prophet Muhammad. It's a hadith, a prophetic tradition, where he says, if the day of judgment comes and there's a seed in your hand, go ahead and plant it, right? And it's just like a beautiful irony, like the world's falling apart. Why would you plant the seed? But it's this idea that if that's the last thing you do, like you have to be productive and you have to be contributing, even if that's the last thing that will happen.
So what is the role of music in Islamic funeral services?
Yeah, so like you, Lynn, I mean, there's also some similarities in the sense that music per se, in the sense of instrumental music, would not be a part of that. But at the same time, music has always been an important part of Muslim civilization and Muslim culture. And but specifically when it comes to the death and dying, there is a lot of chanting that happens. And I will say, when it comes to the Quran, which Muslims view as one of many scriptures, right? Like it's really interesting. Muslims do not think of the Quran as like the only scripture. In fact, they see it as the sort of, they see this lineage, like the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. And so, these are all sort of the Abrahamic scriptures. The orality of the Quran is such an important characteristic of it that it's to be recited, and there are certain rules that have to be followed. So in some ways, it's like music, but it's also different. I mean, there's also some improvisation. So there's, Muslims mainly engage with the Quran through listening to it or reciting it. And so this is mainly what will happen in, when it comes to death and dying. And there's a lot of peace and sort of, like you said, this healing that experience brings. And in Muslim culture, what often happens is the family of the deceased, they will hold a recital gathering, and people will come, and sometimes they will bring a well-known reciter, someone who recites very nicely, to come and recite, and everyone will listen, or people will just take turns reciting. And so, yeah.
This is interesting. In all of these conversations, when you have a funeral gathering, or when you have a group of people that are mourning the loss of a loved one or a community member or whatever, are the structures that are in place, whatever the traditions they are they on behalf of the departed, or are they for those of us that are left behind? And we don't have a Roman Catholic with us, but in Roman Catholic tradition, the Requiem Mass is said or sung or offered on behalf of the departed soul. So hundreds of years ago, there were votive masses. You could pay for a votive mass, and that was a way to, shave a few years off of purgatory for your departed loved one. But in this piece, the Bach Cantata 106 is called Actus Tragicus, God's Time is the Best Time. Its theology puts it in line with his predecessor, Heinrich Schütz, who wrote an extraordinary piece about the same length, a little longer. And then the Brahms Requiem, which was 150 years later, all of which are collections of texts that are not offered on behalf of the departed soul, but for us left behind to hear, as consolation, as a means to reconcile grief, and a way to, as I said from the beginning, death makes us mortal, facing death makes us human. And I think it's that the means by which we can face our mortality. But I love the idea that the scripture is inherently a musical event, because it's an oral tradition as much as anything else. And I think that's something missing from Bach's tradition, but that is compensated for by glorious music that is inherited from it. But fascinating.
Yeah, and I think you raise a really important point as to is the purpose of this recital for the dead or for the ones who remain behind? And I think that's a really interesting question. I will say there is a difference of opinion among Muslims in who you ask, but traditionally the belief is that actually this will help benefit the soul that's departed, and that so you're reciting not just for your own consolation, but you're actually gifting this as something that's sort of going to be in their scale of deeds, when they meet God, or perhaps, in their, so there's some of that going on. But we do have a more, especially in the modern period, the sort of more scriptural trend where it's like, oh, well, where's the evidence? Where's the scriptural evidence for that belief? And so there's been some pushback against that amongst some groups of Muslims. So really, there is this tension, one can say, in terms of how they think about this question.
Yeah, and I would say that's what links these two. Another important thing that links to all the pieces on the concert, February 24th, is that they all serve more as a consolation for those who the dead have left behind than of memorializing those that we've lost. And so, yeah,
it strikes me as your resident atheist. Really quickly, what's interesting to me is sort of the neuroscience of it. When I'm listening to each of the descriptions of the process, it strikes me that whether it's intentional or not, it's allowing us to deal with that cycle of anxiety, right? And that, we have lots of really interesting research on how, it helps to go through a full cycle of anxiety. And, music is a way to do that. Chanting is a way to do that. So, whether we just happened or stumbled upon it, it seems as though this is a common way of dealing with, the anxiety around death, is to actually sing or chant or, express somehow the things we can't say in words in a way that allows us to kind of cut off that fight or flight. But anyhow, I'll leave it at that.
There's a wonderful recent book that was published the past couple of years by the man who is the senior art and architecture critic for the Washington Post. His name is Philip Kennicott. And it was given to me sort of randomly, but it's called Counterpoint, a memoir of Bach and memory, or something like that. But he's an architecture critic, so he's not a musicologist, and it's not going to put you to sleep or anything. But when his mother was dying of cancer, she was living in Arizona, and he went to be with her for the last 6 weeks or something like that. And he knew he needed to travel light, and so he thought, well, what CDs? He's quite a good pianist, and he said, what CDs am I going to bring? And knowing I can only bring a certain number, whatever. And that's when it hit him that I will take Bach, because I can listen to Bach when I am exultantly, ebulliently, unrestrainedly happy, but I can listen to the same piece in the depth of grief, and it does the same. And that's when it occurred to him that the music of Bach does that more than any other. It can meet that moment for an individual in extraordinary ways. He then goes on to discuss, his journey with learning the Goldberg variations of Bach over a year as a means by which to remember his mother and to reconcile lots of things about his relationship with her.
Which, if you don't know, it is insanely difficult
It's
piece.
extremely difficult. Yeah,
a lot of notes.
I mean, it's actually in pandemic. People said, "Oh, you must be so happy you can sit at home and play the piano." And
You're like, no,
you're nuts. I mean, sit at home and play the piano. It reminds me of what a terrible pianist I am. So it's like, there's no consolation there.
Especially when you have to play the Goldberg.
That's a great. When you were talking about that, it's here is somebody who, I don't know if he has a faith tradition, but he is clearly a secular humanist. Beautiful writer for the Washington Post, but deeply connected and aware of, like an Umberto Eco, of beautiful things, and how he found this journey with music to be a conversation companion, in his own struggles and journey with the loss of his mother.
I feel like Christianity is represented a lot in music. So have you, as an atheist, a Buddhist, a Muslim, have you found your faith ever represented in music, even if you don't necessarily use it in your funeral practices?
I'm going to say really quickly, I don't think of that in a very literal sense. I can happily walk into any church, any recital hall, and I hear I can have a spiritual experience as an atheist without worrying about or not even, having to think about the provenance of it. That's, I think, what is universal about music. I find the Muslim call to prayer, painfully beautiful. Yeah. I find, I think that there is something about the way in which we practice our faiths, whether it is through music or, in other ways, that can be deeply universal and appreciated regardless of what your particular faith tradition might be. So I think that's an interesting question, but it's just not one that really, I don't think about it at all. I find, religious music beautiful. I find music that is secular beautiful. And I think it's interesting because if you were to just do a quick Google, you will find that there are certain songs that atheists choose, for their memorials. Music communicates something, and I'm not sure it has to be literally tied to a faith tradition, but that's...
Yeah, so as I talk about the traditional or the Buddhism, we don't literally sing, right, or have music. I will say modern days they make more songs for example the kids like Sunday school, they create some songs so the kids will sing, trying to spread that teaching. So they're more and more using more like a modern musical language to make those music. So because that's not tradition. So if you ask me about religion's point of view, I don't know how myself will connect to my religion through music. But since I'm a classical musician, so I'm familiar with those religious music and play that a lot. So that's not foreign to me. But maybe when I perform those things, that might not bring that religious thing as deep a level of people really connect out with their own religion. But I do want to share in music therapist point of view is maybe not a requiem, but one of the practice we do in music therapist is we'll help the client compose a song. And it could talk about a lot of things, maybe a life review, or maybe even a song that dedicate to a person that even is a thank you, or is in an unfinished business, even apology or something. So you bring a life closure to that person through the process of the song, also the product of the song. And then after that, this song will be a legacy behind of that person, but also a comforting pieces for the people left behind. So I guess I, not in a religious point of view, but I connect music to in this way.
Yeah. I was nodding when you were mentioning the call to prayer because the last time I was in Jordan and Turkey was in 2019, and I would find myself just stopping in my stopping in my tracks as soon as I heard the call to prayer, and it just has this impact, like this, it just touches me really to the core, and I really missed it. Like I missed hearing it, and so then fast forward, I think last Ramadan, which is a month when Muslims fast, I was at a friend's house, and she had this clock with the call to prayer, and it was so beautiful. And so I recently purchased one of those clocks, and I was like, "Is it gonna sound the same? Like hearing it from a, not actually
human.
alive,
Yeah.
but you can pick like 7 different adhans, and the one I picked, I think, is the one from Jerusalem, or I'm not sure where, but it's a really beautiful one. So I'm glad, and it's not the same, but it does have, I heard it the other day, and I'm like, I'm glad I bought this clock because I can sort of in some ways, recapture that feeling that it brings, and that consolation, and that sort of, I think the feeling it evokes is just this feeling of being in the present and kind of pushing everything out, like pushing, you have this moment of consciousness, but it's also, everything's just pushed out. I don't know how to explain it. You know, you're just there, and you feel yourself there, and that's really that feeling it evokes within me. I'm curious to hear, that what feeling it evoked in you. But to answer Eleanor's question, I would say I do feel that music, is representative. I think the question specifically was, do I feel?
Do you feel like Islam is represented in music that you hear?
Okay. Yeah, I definitely think I find music where Islam and Muslim culture and Muslim values or just, culture is definitely represented. And I would say there is a production of this new kind of different subgenres of Muslim American music. There's hip hop, and there's even a Muslim country singer, believe it or not, in the United States. Kareem Salama, actually, is his name, Kareem Salama. He's a really good country singer, and he's Muslim. And so, really, really fascinating. Of course, hip-hop in America has been very much influenced by Islam, specifically the Nation of Islam, and then its offshoot, the Five Percenters, although they are theologically different than mainstream Islam, but they use a lot of Muslim words, even in those raps, words like inshallah, or even the word Allah, which is just the Arabic word for God. And so, and of course, throughout the Muslim world, music plays an important role, even in religious life. There are different names for these genres, but for example, in more religious circles, they'll have what's called nasheed, and nasheed is, there are usually no musical instruments involved. Sometimes there is, but it's a certain, I'm not a musicologist, so I'm probably not going to do a good job explaining this, but, it's usually poetry with, even like Rumi's poetry, like very spiritual content, and then it's sung in these different kind of very melodic, ways. And also, if you're interested, my sister's a really good reciter, and I can probably find a clip she sent me if you want. I can play it at the end for you all if you think it'd be interesting to.
What Alexa was talking about being I'm a lapsed, whatever I am, lapsed Unitarian, lapsed agnostic. I don't know if that's a thing. But I remember being on a ferry going down the Bosphorus in Istanbul, and it was the call to prayer. And what's cool about that is I find it tremendously moving as a white guy from Michigan, I find it incredibly moving. And what I love about it is how obviously none of the muezzins make any attempt to sync it up. Yes. And so you get this cacophony. It's not, cacophony has a negative connotation. I don't mean that, but you get this wonderful polyphony of all these things, all these call to prayers coming in all the time, and it is utter chaos, and yet it works beautifully because it's music. And music can be chaotic and beautiful at the same time. And if they were all speaking, it would be unintelligible. And
this is where I think I struggle sometimes in music performance, where, for example, I was talking about African American spirituals earlier. If you perform those in a concert and you remove them from a religious context of praise and worship or something like that, I start to feel a little strange about that. Like it starts to feel performative, and that maybe I'm not honoring the purpose around which the music was created.
That's a whole different podcast.
That's a whole different podcast. That's a whole different semester.
Ooh, that's complicated.
But I think it does. It comes to terms with what we're saying, which is when you hear the sound of devotion, it is intergalactic. We can embrace that, and we know it. You don't have to be educated about it. You don't have to have heard it before, but it is recognizable one to another, regardless. And I find that I sometimes say to audiences, a poor kid that grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains Baptist. Why in the world that I ever discovered that I loved the music of an 18th century German guy? I don't get that. But I find it has been tremendously a beautiful journey, and I think everybody can empathize and come around that idea.
Where can we find tickets for this performance?
Well, you can't because it's a free concert. And so we just would love you to show up, 7:30 p.m., Belk Chapel. on the campus of Queen's University on Thursday, February 24th.
Say thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is a super enriching conversation, and I really appreciate you guys taking time to talk with us today. Thank you.